This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema.
I just rewatched Pulp Fiction for the first time in quite a while. I picked up the new 4K disc, and it looks fantastic.
How does it hold up in terms of, how does it hold up, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like that movie has aged strangely with me over the years. I loved it initially, and then I remember seeing it, and maybe it was just because there was too much reference to it for a while or something. And I remember I for some reason felt kind of sick of it. But watching it this time, it just felt fresh and fun and almost like the first time again. And, like all that cleverness and kind of fun storytelling and jumping back and forth, it felt new again, which was kind of cool.
Well, that's interesting. I went to see it at the cinema like 2 or 3 times, I think, when it first came out. I was just absolutely bowled over by it. And I've never watched it, and it's never lost that for me. I feel like there was so many imitators. That was slightly the worry that it was sort of draining. There was 24 Hours in the Valley, A Day in the Valley, was it called? I remember was one with Charlize Theron and James Spader, and there was just a whole bunch that came soon afterwards.
I knew that was part of it. And that too, it was kind of fun to see. Right, you can never get sick of Sam Jackson, but it was kind of fun to see. I don't remember the last time I watched John Travolta in anything. He's been kind of, out of the, doing these smaller movies and kind of not really in the. So it was kind of fun to see him, prime Travolta again, and some of these people.
What's weird about looking back on it now, actually, is how young John Travolta is. And yeah, I totally agree. I remember watching it and thinking, what's that has been doing? And then thinking, he's not that old. He's like in his 40s, I think.
Right. Yeah. Because he was, he kind of broke onto the scene. He was like a teen, early 20s. And it's like in the 90s, he had this like resurgence in all these kind of interesting movies and action movies and all kinds of stuff. Which was cool. Just reminded me of how many of those it's been so long since I had seen, like Face Off and Broken Arrow and like all these movies he was in that were like really fun that I want to revisit.
Yeah, Broken Arrow. I remember watching that a load of times. John Woo, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, both of those. Face Off.
Yeah, Face Off is John Woo as well. Yeah.
So interesting stuff for sure.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually probably just keep all of this in because I haven't got much time to edit anything. So apologies to the listeners because this is all going to probably just be in a completely unedited way. Maybe I'll lop a little bit off at the very beginning. But I'll just start with...
Hey, candid film conversation is always fun.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just introduce myself. Basically, hello, everybody. Welcome to Writers on Film. My name's John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic. And today I'm going to be talking to Chris Yogerst. How did I do? Did I nail the pronunciation?
Yep, you nailed it.
Brilliant. Excellent. He is the author of he's going to be the author of a book which is coming out next year about a history of Warner Brothers, right, Chris?
Yep.
But we
biography of the Warner Brothers.
Brilliant, excellent. But today we're going to talk about a book that is already available and which I would highly recommend. Hollywood, right? I'm gonna gnarl the title, but it's Hollywood Hates Hitler.
Yes, yeah, it's got a very long subtitle, and this was an incredibly difficult book to find the title. Just because it's, when people would say, "Oh, what are you working on?" And it's like, "Oh, a book about the 1941 Senate investigation into motion picture propaganda." It's like, I'm already out of breath. Like, what do we call this thing? Hollywood Hates Hitler just seemed to make sense because that's really kind of what brought all of this together.
Right, absolutely. And I just was absolutely amazed by this. But before we get into the book, I just want to find out a little bit more about you as a writer and how you got into writing about film. What was your sort of introduction to sort of approaching cinema in this way?
So when I was, I fell in love with movies really. I mean, as a child of the 80s, when we were talking about these action movies earlier, I fell in love with movies just, in the posters behind me. I know we're not on video on your podcast, but I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Ghostbusters. I mean, these big movies of that decade just really drew me in. And then I remember renting on VHS out of curiosity, Psycho. And it was one of the first. I mean, I'd also grown up on monster movies. I loved the black and white Godzilla movies and stuff. So I had a little courage to look at this old black and white movie as a pretty young. Yeah, how old? I don't know. I was probably 12 or 13 or 14, and I was just floored by this. This old movie that did not feel old. It looked old. It was black and white, but it did not. It felt as immediate as anything else I was watching at the time. And through kind of fast forward into studying film in college, I was I really got into genre and the history of genre and stuff like that, and slowly I got into the histories of the studios and how when I was looking at how movies evolved over time, I started to get more interested in how the movies represented the time in which they were released. So I started to look more for historical connections when a movie came out. And that really is kind of what led to, the kind of writing I'm doing now, where I'm looking at how movies are either representing or interacting with the history in which they're released, and which is exactly what we have going on with this book. And that's also what drew me to writing about the Warner Brothers, is because, a lot of people have written about the Warner Brothers studio as the movies that are, they're always ripped from the headlines. They're the very topical movies. They're the kind of gritty, real down to earth movies. And what I wanted to do was write a book about how that was definitely a top-down influence. The brothers embodied that in everything they did. And there's so much that still isn't in a lot of books that I wanted to kind of synthesize. So that's really, I think, what draws me to a lot of the research that I do now is how is kind of a parallel between the history of Hollywood and just world history. Where do the movies come in pivotal moments, stuff like that.
It's interesting as well. Reading your book, it was really interesting how there are these dominant personalities who really, as you say, have these top-down effects on the movies being produced. And I'm sort of thinking these days we don't really have that. I mean, Netflix makes decisions, and A24, and I guess with the comic book movies, you maybe have Kevin Feige as a sort of visible personality, but we don't tend to talk about studio heads anymore, sort of leading the charge, leading the direction of the studio.
That's true. And I think that's another reason I'm fascinated with this kind of history, because we have these larger than life personalities. And I mean, was it yesterday or the day before? It was Spielberg's birthday. There's a lot of talk about, we have a few filmmakers left that kind of have this influence. And I'm just trying to think of, people that have come up in the last few decades. I mean, I guess, something like, with horror movies, you got like Jason Blum, you got these kind of, people who have kind of overseen kind of a large output of movies that have a very specific style. You know what you're getting into with the Blumhouse horror movie. But you're right. This is, it's more few and far between. Whereas, in the golden age of Hollywood, these personalities, they ran the show, right? They were everywhere, every studio, every independent production, and also largely across popular culture. The influence of, like with this book, these kinds of politicians and stuff. Comes across differently. I'm reading a book right now. There's this new fantastic book by Beverly Gage about J. Edgar Hoover. And it's absolutely fascinating how much influence and impact he had, and how, I always knew he was a larger than life figure, but not reading this book, I didn't realize how much I didn't know. And there's these monumental 20th century figures. And Hollywood was right at the center of a lot of it.
I got a feeling for, when I interviewed George Stevens Jr. earlier this year. He's a guy who had one foot in Hollywood, one foot in Washington, and was complete. Just it was such an honor talking to him, because it felt like you talked to Kennedy and now you're talking to me. I mean, I'm sorry how your life has gone, but wow, what an amazing experience.
Yeah, that memoir was amazing. It was incredible. There's actually a lot of parallels between that book and the Hoover book, in that every page, you just can't believe the next thing this person is tied to. And of course, George Stevens Jr. is a far better person than J. Edgar Hoover. I'll just clarify that. Two very different people. But yeah, and how modest he remains, George Stevens, right? I was put in touch with him. My editor at Kentucky was a friend of his, Pat McGilligan, and who you also interviewed. Yeah, so
yes,
Pat.
yeah, yes.
And he put me in touch with George just to ask some stuff about Warner Brothers and just to clarify a couple things. And it's just, how incredibly just down to earth and modest he is. And when you read the stuff that he's done throughout his life, he's on a whole nother level.
No, absolutely. He was wonderful. He was a lovely guest, but he'd listened to the podcast, which was sort of like, does not always happen. He was and was very, very complimentary about it. It was very nice. So I was lovely. When you talk at the very beginning of your book, you have this sort of, I think it was, hugely necessary background to how, Nazism and fascism, we're talking Italian fascism with Mussolini, to some degree Franco from Spain, and Hitler in Germany, obviously, how they have a sympathizers that are based in America, how America is not this, it could not possibly happen here, the sort of Sinclair Lewis title of the novel, it was very, very possible that it could happen there.
Yeah. So the lead up to this book, this is where I was trying to throw around the idea of, is there a book here or not? Is this just a couple of, articles, or is this a whole book? And luckily one of my mentors, Tom Doherty, said this is 100% a book and you need to write it. So then I felt pressure to do so. But the reason I asked him though, is because over the last decade, there's been a bunch of books, some good, some not so good, about the relationship between Hollywood and fascism. And some of the big ones, of course, Tom's book, Hollywood and Hitler, 1933 to 39, was a great book just about, the rise of the anti-Nazi League and the Popular Front and all this kind of stuff in Hollywood, how they had Mussolini's kid, partying in Hollywood. And then by the time Leni Riefenstahl came, they ran her out of town. There's all kinds of interesting history here. And then a few years after that book, I think that was in 2013, Stephen Ross and Laura Rosenzweig both wrote books about the rise of anti-Nazi espionage in Los Angeles. And those were also really eye-opening to me, because they, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, they really connect Hollywood to this larger historical moment. And that's when I really started to see connections to the lead up to this investigation, because that was the big thing. You've got this investigation that embarrassed the senators, that kind of came and went, but it was kind of the pinnacle of this rising fascist sympathy throughout the 1930s that kind of got lost by history, because it happened mere months before Pearl Harbor, and understandably, is now in the shadow of World War II. So it was kind of forgotten. But, I got increasingly interested in what was going on in the 30s in Hollywood, and this push and pull with fascism. And I started to see the Senate investigation in 41 as like the pinnacle of that, kind of it peaked. And then kind of like what I was reading in the Hoover book, how McCarthyism peaked with the Army McCarthy hearings. And then he was embarrassed on the national stage, and it kind of the Cold War started to dwindle in a lot of ways. And so I started to actually, I wish I read that book before this. That would have been a better parallel for the conclusion. But similarly, I saw the 41 investigation as kind of the peak of that fascist sympathy. And then this kind of blew up in their faces, and it started to, and of course, then World War II, and we took on fascism, including Hollywood took on fascism.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this. What I love about the book, though, is spoiler alert: Pearl Harbor happens, but. But as you're reading the book, as you're going through the hearings, and you break them down on a sort of day-by-day basis, I completely lost sight of that. And I was just thinking, God, how is this going to turn out? And I honestly, I'm not. Hope I'm not blowing smoke anywhere up your posterior, but it's this is a Netflix show. This is a drama. I can see this because even that sort of denouement is such a brilliant sort of left field. Oh shit, that's what happened the day after, you know?
Right. Well, and that's one of the reasons I decided to do the book was that this, I wasn't the first person to write about the investigation, but everywhere else it's just kind of synthesized, and it's, you get a little bit of overview, a couple of the, big lines, and then it's kind of gone. But when I was reading through the congressional record, it felt like a Netflix series. It really did. It felt like some kind of legal procedural.
Yeah, and exactly. Yeah.
I was riveted reading this, and I'm like, I gotta share what the day-to-day was like on this, because it was amazing, because they were, the Hollywood couldn't, it was completely, the deck was purposely stacked against Hollywood to embarrass them, and it completely backfired. And it was wild, because Hollywood brought in Wendell Willkie, who was this very popular politician who ran for president, or didn't win, but was kind of this beloved political figure, politically connected. He came in as their counsel, but the senators on this investigation committee said that they essentially muzzled him. They said you can't cross-examine anybody, that kind of stuff. So what Willkie did was every day he would just unload in the press. So I was reading a day of investigation, then I would, look up, Hollywood Reporter and Motion Picture Daily and all this kind of stuff, and I'd be like, oh shit, wow, he is really laying into them. And this is, and then the journalists started doing that too, and it became funny, which was kind of perfect, because it's such a frustrating subject to have this kind of laughter. Because I went to the National Archives to dig around in this, and I remember when the archivist emailed me, I had emailed asking, is there anything on this, surviving documents of this investigation? And after a while, they emailed me back. They're like, we found about 1,000 pages, but the bad news is it's all disorganized and out of order. And I said, well, that's fantastic. That means nobody has looked at it yet. And
virgin snow.
Right. And reading through it, I mean, the fan letters in there, some of them I put in the book, are just depressing. I mean, the amount of people that are writing into the investigation saying, yeah, you're finally going after the Jews in Hollywood. It was disheartening, for sure, which is why, once you read Willkie and you read Drew Pearson and these people in the press just pounding the senators, it's a breath of fresh air. And it's like, okay, so this wasn't just unanimously accepted. There was definitely some turning points. By this time, we knew what was going on in Europe. We knew what was going on in concentration camps. This stuff was all over the national press. So the senators clearly could not read the room. They thought they were going to, they really thought, Gerald and I, who helped really put this together, really thought this was going to be a slam dunk, that we're going to embarrass Hollywood on the national stage, and we're going to ruin the film industry by showing that they're trying to push us into war with these anti-Nazi movies. But the exact opposite happened, which is what made this kind of, after a while, as frustrating of a story it is, it became really fun to write, because it did not turn out as they had hoped.
It's kind of a really interesting corrective as well, because I think the idea that we have of Hollywood is very much colored by the McCarthy hearings, and the idea that they had this one moment where they all flew over there. Bogart flies over with all Charlton Heston all as a bunch, and then they completely fold because the Hollywood 11 or so, their tactics are muddled, and well, there's a whole industry of books about that as well. But here you have a situation in which Hollywood didn't fold. And yes, there were, who knows what would have happened if it had continued and Pearl Harbor hadn't happened. And, we have seen very bad arguments win regardless of how stupid they are. But in this situation, I came away with like a respect for elements of Hollywood. Like, Warner comes over as, in this situation, in this case, kind of quite good, quite very good indeed.
Oh yeah, Harry Warner is he is an absolute badass. So my Warner Brothers book, that started as a project I was just going to do a biography of Harry Warner, because I'm like, people need to know more about this guy. He is incredible. He's the exact opposite of so many of the Hollywood moguls that we kind of love, but also don't really like how they acted in their personal life. Like, he was the real deal. He was a real dude. He was a respectable guy. And it was actually Pat McGilligan who had said, yeah, you need to do all of the brothers because we need to deep dive. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. Fine. But it's interesting. You bring up the HUAC stuff in the 40s and 50s, and yeah, Harry Warner, he dismantled the senators in this instance. And when the House committee comes, one of the things I found out from my book is that Harry told me, so it was Harry Warner this time. It was Jack Warner with HUAC. And when the House came after Hollywood, Harry Warner said, don't even give them the time of day. Don't waste your time on this. I mean, he, after dismantling the government accusations in 41, he didn't take any of this seriously. And, he was older by then and was like, I'm not even going to give this the time of day. And sadly, Jack goes in, and he was not nearly as politically savvy as his older brother. So, he didn't really do the studio or the industry any favors, as we know, like you said, there's an industry of books about this. But this is an interesting precursor, because Hollywood actually stepped up and defended themselves. And I think they could have done that, reading through all of this, when the blacklist era and you read through what happened in 41, it's kind of hard not to think that they could have done a better job defending themselves against HUAC, although the communist fear was probably greater. The social political anxiety was definitely greater. So I don't want to discount that post-war fact. But it's still, when you read the stuff in 41, it's easy to start thinking strategically of things they could have done differently in 47.
Right. And definitely not cede the whole idea that anything that looks like dealing with social issues is commie propaganda, which was which damages the film industry as we go forward and the way we tell stories and limits it. So prior to all of this, you have a number of films which are produced of a sort of, as you say, sort of anti-Nazi, and this is obviously prior to America's entry into the war, and there's, as you outline, there's a strong isolationist bent which is opposed to these. So what were those early films, and what was their impact on audiences?
Yeah, so there's quite a few, and actually John Flynn, who testifies in front of you, he produced. He's the only one who actually produces a list of offensive movies, or what the isolationists thought were offensive. And it's a lot of it's mostly Hollywood and European films. But some of the big ones, of course, I mean, sticking with Warner Brothers, I mean, Confessions of a Nazi Spy is probably the biggest one, because that one really broke the dam in terms of, there was the production code that didn't allow movies to ridicule other religions and nations. So that was one of the problems that some people have unfairly criticized Hollywood. Why didn't you go after the Nazis sooner? It's like, well, they kind of couldn't. There was this production code that recently got reignited, got new teeth through Joe Breen, and they would be in a ration of shit if they started going after other nations. But by 1939, things are just so bad, right? Following Kristallnacht, and you've got so much going on, invasions left and right, that the Warner Brothers just said, screw it, we're going after the Nazis. And in their true to form ripping from the headlines, you've got the Leon Theroux exposing the Nazi ring in New York, I believe. So they're just ripping from the headlines. They're not propagandizing anything. They're just making a story like they've always been making stories. So Confession of a Nazi Spy was huge, but there was a whole lot of other ones. I mean, another favorite that's gotten a lot of play in the last couple of years is the Mortal Storm MGM's film with Jimmy Stewart, which is fantastic. And that one almost is probably maybe the best of these because it feels very current, at least in this country for sure, because you've got a character who is growing up, coming of age, and all of a sudden society is split between kind of the fascists and the not fascists, and you have the fascist sympathizers starting to see their friends and colleagues and teachers and family members who aren't on board as enemies. And it feels, we see the rise of polarization in that movie. And it came out in 1940, and it feels like it could have been made yesterday. So I feel like that movie has gotten a lot of attention justifiably, but you've also got Fritz Lang, Mad Hunt, great movie about the guy who gets caught trying to hunt Hitler. The Man I Married, Four Sons. What else is in here? It's been a while since I've watched some of these.
We've got the Chaplin, The Great Dictator, which is
right,
which comes up as well in hearings.
It comes up, and what's fascinating is they keep threatening to subpoena Chaplin. And I wish they did, because he would have made mincemeat of these guys. He would have done even better than Harry Warner. They kept bringing him up, and what's telling, every time they bring him up, or quite often, they keep pointing out to, if they bring up the Great Dictator, they talk about it as being an awful movie, but then they'll also point out that very directly that Chaplin is he's not from the U.S., right? And you start to see the xenophobia come out, and then at one point they say, I'm trying to remember who says it, but they basically say, yeah, he's not only is he not from here, but he's been living here for a while and hasn't pursued becoming a citizen. So they're always just leveling this kind of suspicion of anybody that they can. And they do this so often throughout the investigation that one of the great lines in this whole thing is when Daryl Zanuck comes to defend, he opens his whole thing by reminding everybody that he's actually born in the U.S., so they don't have to be afraid of him, because all these other moguls that they brought are all these European-born immigrants. So when Zanuck comes up, he basically, it was just one of those reminders that, like, yeah, they know what's really going on in this investigation. This really isn't about movies, is it? It's about foreigners pushing us into a war. So Zanuck calls them out pretty directly, and it's pretty awesome.
It's weird with the Chaplin piece, because everybody keeps saying in the testimony that you're quoting, they're sort of saying, oh, it was a real flop, and he's not, and that's sort of proof that it's propaganda, because first of all, people don't really want it, and secondly, if it was for profit, if you were just doing it to make money, then these films don't. But The Great Dictator, well, it wasn't a flop at all, was it? I thought it was quite a huge hit for Chaplin. I thought it was like one of his most commercially successful films.
I think so. I don't remember precisely either. But it definitely got a lot of fanfare, and that was a criticism with a lot of these movies. Well, actually, the Hollywood could have defended with some of this, but they probably didn't want to put this on the national stage. That a lot of these anti-Nazi movies didn't make a ton of money, but they did get really passionate followings. It really did connect with a part of the audience, and this is, the good time to remember. It's not like today where a studio puts all of their money into, a few movies a year and they try to make a ton of money, where, these studios were making, in the early 30s. I'm trying to remember, I counted one of the years, it was something like 70 or 80 movies from Warner Brothers. It was ridiculous. So they're making a ton of movies. So they have range to make some movies that may not make money or may not make a lot of money, but they might be important movies. And that's what a lot of these were, and certainly that's what Chaplin was most interested in too. That's why United Artists was a thing to begin with, so the artists could have the control to make meaningful movies. But you're right. I mean, it had been a while since Chaplin had been in anything, and this movie, it was huge. It got a lot of talk. I mean, it got a lot of Nazi propagandists all felt compelled to respond to it. Right. So it got attention, it got headlines, and it did exactly what Chaplin set out for it to do. And it's continuing to do that. Right. I mean, you still, every now and again on social media, that final speech will go viral, and people have seen that final speech of that movie that probably haven't even seen The Great Dictator, right? I mean, so it's still making the rounds.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's one of kind of, it's not my favorite Chaplin by a long street because of not for any political reasons, obviously, but just because I find his voice a little bit, it's just not what I wanted when I went to hear with Chaplin speaking. But it's amazing. It's got some sections which are great, and I showed it to students like a couple of years ago. I think it was during lockdown. And I was surprised at how well they responded to it. I mean, they absolutely loved it. It wasn't just a case of like, they were like, oh, respectful of it or anything like that. They just loved it out and out. And these aren't film students, I hasten to add. These are just language students. So they're just watching, they're watching it as a film,
Yeah, well, and I've shown clips of it too. So most of my students too in my film and popular culture classes, they're first and second year students, so they're not film majors either. So it's more of a general audience. And I haven't shown the entire film. I probably should, but I just show clips. And anytime I do, they're laughing at it like it's a brand new movie. I mean, I get the same response when I do Sherlock Jr. in that class, which is kind of fun. But I usually show them the clip where Chaplin is doing like the German gibberish in his speech, and it's like, because they've all seen, in classes and documentaries and the newsreel footage of Hitler, right? So I just cut right to him doing his, like sauerkraut, and they laugh like it's a brand new comedy, and it's like he is still funny.
Yeah. Well, he's shouting about the Juden, and the microphone is wilting in front of him with the force of his hate, and even things like Mussolini's adenoidal hinkle.
All of that, pouring the water down his pants, like it's gold. It's still gold.
It's so silly and so serious at exactly the same time. It's crazy. And of course, I mean, you had even before that, I think the Three Stooges did a Nazi-based short, which I watched. I'm not a huge fan of the Three Stooges, but I watched that and I thought it was really good. It really stands up.
Yeah. There was, there were certainly some anti-fascist stuff going on. I mean, the Three Stooges. There was also a small movie called I Was a Captive of Nazi Germany. But there wasn't really anything, like a major studio putting out a movie, like Edward G. Robinson was in Confessions of a Nazi Spy, right? And you have Jimmy Stewart and Jean Arthur in Mortal Storm. So you've got bona fide stars and star power behind this kind of stuff by the end of the decade. But a lot of the movies, and I talk about this in the book too. I mean, a lot of the movies, there was a good amount of stuff. When you look at the 30s closely, there was a lot of allegorical anti-fascist stuff coming out. A lot of it from Warner Brothers, They Won't Forget and Black Legion and stuff like this, where they're not saying Nazi and fascist, but when you watch it closely, it's pretty clear what was going on, and it would have been pretty clear for audiences of the day. So it really wasn't all that much of a surprise by the end of the decade when they started going, kind of taking the gloves off and going against the Nazis. Because I try to contextualize a lot of this in the book too. There was so much going on. Not only, do I incorporate some of the research from those books about the anti-Nazi espionage in Los Angeles, but you have, right, kind of the rise of the KKK and the Black Legion. You have you have Father Charles Coughlin on the radio. You've got a lot of you've got Charles Lindbergh in his growing fascist sympathies, and all of this stuff is just building. So that's I try to take all of that into account, because that's another way that I show how. That's another way to justify why a book about this 41 investigation that kind of fizzled. While it represents not just this short kind of failed inquiry, but it represents kind of the fizzling of this fascist sympathy that was peaking at the end of the decade.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very that in some ways was one of the most powerful moments in the book was that those introductory chapters where you're making this point that look, the thing that we're living with today has kind of always been there, and I'm not even sure. I mean, it fizzled on the national stage, but I'm not sure it ever goes away. It's just sometimes it allows itself to speak out loud, and other times it couches it couches its arguments in somewhat more coded language and dog whistle racism and anti-Semitism, as you refer to. Black Legion, by the way, Humphrey Bogart. I think that's a film ripe for rediscovery because it's one of his best sort of pre-Casablanca movies.
Yeah, I think it's one of his most powerful movies. I mean, it is just, that movie packs a punch like you just can't. It's hard to describe. It's so good. It's almost hard to describe. I mean, it tracks with so much. I mean, yeah, you've got this. I mean, for people who have not seen it, I mean, you have this factory worker who is, he's up for a promotion and he doesn't get it, and he's looking for answers, and he starts listening to this radio preacher, which is very much like Charles Coughlin, who starts going on about his bigotry and his xenophobia and all this kind of stuff. And he starts to make accusations about this guy that he knows that got the promotion because of his big nose, right? So therefore he was Jewish, right? They're playing on the stereotype. And then he joins the Black Legion, which is this KKK-like group that was in reality growing in the Midwest. And, we see this trajectory of this person who is radicalized, found answers for the frustrations of their life in this growing national racism and prejudice. And it is a powerful movie. I mean, and the reviews at the time were it's like everyone knew that this movie, like, wow, I'm surprised that movie didn't make him an A-list star. We had to wait till Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, because this movie just was really, really incredible.
And I think he's so powerful because Bogart's always great when he's playing a character who, I mean, he has it in his locker. Yes, we love the Dashiell Hammett character in Maltese Falcon. We love Rick from Casablanca, but he's also great as in The Treasure of Sierra Madre and in In a Lonely Place. These really kind of morally ambivalent characters, let's say, if not out and out, weak men who are susceptible to failure. And this I would add to that pantheon of brilliant American failures.
For sure. Yeah. He's definitely at his best on many levels, but one of them is very much when we have a character that is, like you said, ambivalent or conflicted. And then the kind of conflict manifests in something awful. Right. And so if anyone who has not seen Black Legion, you need to check it out, because you will not be, definitely not be sad you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, you've got these hugely popular people. I mean, but as we say, at this point, Bogart hasn't quite broken out, but Edward G. Robinson, Jimmy Stewart, Charlie Chaplin. I mean, I always think that when people are going head to head with Charlie Chaplin, it's kind of like, why are you bothering? This guy's a massive superstar. I mean, the people love him. It just seems like you're on a hiding to nothing. Yeah, it's like when, I don't know, nowadays when somebody sort of starts criticizing Taylor Swift, or do you know how many people you're just going to piss off with that? You know,
don't even open that can of worms.
Exactly. She's great.
Not worth it.
She's great. Let's just say she's great and leave it at that. So I mean, I don't know if there's this sort of populism which is very anti-Hollywood. Sort of from the get-go, right? There's this sort of like, these guys don't live, they live on the West Coast. They're mostly foreigners. They're nothing to do with true American values. And the war, I mean, to begin with, how can that be true when so much of the product that Hollywood is making is being watched 2 or 3 or 4 times a week by everybody?
Mm-hmm. What we're getting at here is really good, because there's this strange undercurrent of like Hollywood movies are so popular, right? And you've got all these, a range of socialists. I can't talk. It's too early. I haven't finished my coffee yet. A range of sociologists, have guessed, anywhere from like 50 to 85 million a week, right, we're going to movies. So it's but that's also one of the reasons why these senators saw it as a threat. And so like the second day, I'm trying to remember who it was now, again, early here. I think it was Wheeler, or I was Clark. Yeah. Clark, Bennett Clark. he testifies and he makes it very clear that one of his issues with Hollywood isn't necessarily the anti-Nazi movies. His issue is that they are getting the headlines, they are getting on the newsreels, and they're not elected figures. And the elected figures, like himself, deserve this kind of platform. And Hollywood does not deserve the platform and influence that they have. And that's clearly his big issue. So there's a lot of sour grapes going on with him. And it's weird. When I started writing this book and considering it was right around I guess was it 2017, 16 or 17. So we already had in the US here, we already had, the America First movement and all this kind of stuff. And I'm reading about the America First movement in the 30s. And I'm like, do y'all not know history? Like, have you not looked back at what this meant then? Because anytime, somebody, in the last few years has been like, well, the America First movement is racist. They'll be like, wow, how can you say that? We're a pro-America. And it's like, well, there's actually a really long history of, and while I was, one of the things I was keeping close to me while I was looking at the lead up to this investigation was a book by Sarah Churchwell called, I believe the title is Behold America, but it's a history of America firsting. And it's fantastic because she tracks it basically from like the 1920s to Donald Trump. And that was one thing I didn't really want to do in my book. I'm like, if I start in the conclusion, start saying like, oh, Trump is doing this now, then it's going to timestamp this thing. Because it's not just that, it was easy to make those parallels when I was writing. But this is something that isn't necessarily just a Trump thing, or it's something that comes up on and off throughout history. Like you said, these things kind of come up, they never really go away, right? They kind of, they come, if all goes well, if they come to the surface, they get their ass kicked and they go back down. And that's what happened in this case. And we're kind of in the middle of this maybe happening again in the US.
Yeah.
But this happens on and off throughout history. So there's a lot of, I kind of look at this book more as an overview of things that have happened, but also kind of a warning, kind of a playbook of what to keep in mind when these things start happening, because generally what happens is these movements can't, the true colors come out eventually. They cannot withstand the criticism. People realize what's really going on, and it starts to go away. And so that's me trying to be a little bit more of an optimist with this, instead of going right to the fear mongering, is that, and that's what I kind of conclude the book, is that anytime this happens, especially when there's pushback against popular culture, eventually the ignorance becomes clear. And, in the beginning of this investigation, Gerald Nye, who helped put this all together, America Firster himself, hadn't even watched any of the movies.
Yeah.
The first day.
What a twist. I can see the Netflix series right there, that being like one of those moments where people go, what? And then one of the senators is actually saying, why don't we just watch some of the films? Let me have a break, watch some of the movies.
Well, yeah, it was Senator McFarland, McFarland, they brought in as a junior senator, thought, oh, this kid lawyer from Arizona, he'll just, he'll follow all of us veterans. And no, he's just a good lawyer. So he's going to be like, let me just fill me in here. I'm not a movie guy. He asked honest questions, and he basically ruined the investigation on the first day.
Yeah. And he's sort of saying, well, so what, how would censorship work then? How would we do it? If let's just assume for a second that there is this propaganda that we don't want to have out there. How would you legislate for it? Without contradicting the First Amendment, and it just baffles everybody in the committee.
Right. It doesn't matter that they muzzled Wilkie, because they had, even Drew Pearson and the Hollywood Reporters even saying that, McFarland has become the best ally Hollywood could ask for, because he asked the real questions, and they're just real honest questions. He's not necessarily defending Hollywood. He right in the beginning, he just said, like, I don't watch a lot of movies. Can you just fill me in on what are the problems with these movies? And I can't answer it. And And throughout the whole investigation, he's like, why don't we stop and watch the movies first and see if there's any problem with these? And near the end of the investigation, McFarlane gets so frustrated, he just walks off. And he's like, I'm done. You guys are stupid. This is a waste of time. So he leaves, which is kind of, and again, that'd be another great moment in a TV series. This big character just walks off the set, walks out of the courtroom, storms out because they're just, and then this is where, again, we keep talking about how Harry Warner, so the first day, Nye says, it's shown that he has not seen any of these movies. And then Harry Warner brings to the stage a letter from Gerald Nye from 1939 talking about how amazed he was to see Confessions of a Nazi Spy, and it made him proud to be an American, and we need more movies like this. And and that's where it was great to read the press, because they were all talking about how red Nye's face became just embarrassed, and it really felt, if it wasn't done then, it was definitely done. He nailed the coffin shut then, even though they had a couple more days of kind of really sad, embarrassing proceedings after that, but it was pretty much done as soon as Harry Warner read that letter.
And you also have one of the things that's interesting, and I think that's where HUAC comes in as a sort of as what is essentially sort of like a continuation of these hearings to some degree, but with a boot very much on the other foot in terms of the strength of not the strength of the case, but the strength of feeling and what have you, is that there are figures within Hollywood who are like gossip columnists, or there's a radio critic that you quote extensively who is testifying, and there's a real sense of like, here's an opportunity for, well, I mean, I always think of Ronald Reagan as being slightly in this category, as someone who's not really good enough to make it in Hollywood, but is prominent enough so he'll use his platform to sort of forward his political ideas in a way that they're criticizing the left for doing, but he'll do it in a much more sort of like a way which is much friendlier to the establishment.
For sure. And then, you're talking about Jimmy Fidler, who, he testified, and he was really good at, and this is where Senator McFarlane, again, he just made it clear that Fidler was just good at making himself the story. Right. And, he pushed himself to get invited to this party because he knew he would be in the headlines, even though, anybody today, I didn't really know much about Jimmy Fidler. Actually, I can't even remember if I'd even heard of him until I started researching this. So he was very much on an attention, a journey for attention, just like another radio personality that there isn't much on. I mean, I found some stuff, but there's probably still more work to be done on G. Allison Phelps, who was on the radio in Los Angeles, and was from all accounts seems like an absolutely batshit crazy guy. Writing these anti-Jewish pamphlets and spreading them all over Los Angeles and stuff. And I've come across these pamphlets in a couple different archives. I'm surprised they didn't bring him in either. But they definitely had a lot of his writing as ammunition, I suppose, for this. And you bring up kind of comparing the HUAC to this. I mean, of course, the difference is one is the House committee, one's a Senate committee. But the reason this one got justified is because they ran this through, which is actually a kind of smart way to get it justified. They ran it through the Interstate Commerce Committee. So they were able to investigate an industry in how it was making money. And whereas, so there was a lot less room to justify the prejudice, even though they tried to get it in there. Whereas the House Un-American Activities Committee seemed to be just born of that, right? It was it was clearly just a witch hunt to smoke out any, left of center sympathies, and brand anything as communist that you don't want around. And maybe part of it is they learned from the embarrassment of the Senate investigation, and they realized, we got to get on the fear tactics a little harder, a little sooner. Otherwise, they're going to have to answer tough questions that they can't answer. Right.
Right.
Which is why this one fizzled.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Have their, sort of prepare the ground much better. And of course, history, the context is different. As you mentioned earlier, there's the wind at your back is different here to what it was come the Cold War and the post-war sort of situation which HUAC faced. When you were working on this, were there any sort of moments where you were sort of genuinely surprised? What was your sort of discovery that you thought, wow, this is something that I've never heard before?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, a lot of the testimony was just wild. I mean, a lot of the things that come to my mind were. Well, I meant one of the things I mentioned before, which is in the boxes, the archives for this at the National Archives, all the fan letters for these senators were just wild. I mean, so anybody who might question, if there was any question of how prominent anti-Semitism was in the 30s. There was no question after that. And it was one of these deals where it's like, I was writing this book for a lot of reasons. I was passionate about it. It was fascinating history, all this kind of stuff. And then I got to a point where I started reading these letters, and then I'm like, okay, I'm writing these letters because fuck these people. It was like, it was, I mean, one of them, one letter after the other saying, you're finally going after the Jews, and thank you for a question, for tackling the Jewish question. One woman actually wrote a letter, and she included in it what is called, and I knew nothing about this until I found this, but it's called the apparently there's the Franklin prophecy. So there's this, it's this fake speech that Benjamin Franklin supposedly gave at the Constitutional Congress, where he was arguing to write the Jews out of the Constitution. So she had written to the senators and said, you're finally making good on what Benjamin Franklin was arguing for, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm reading through this, and I'm like, what did I miss in history class? I'm like, is there's this whole part of Franklin that I don't know? And I was almost kind of like embarrassed. And I started looking around, and I found out that this is a falsified piece of history that started with the Silver Shirts, actually, which was one of these Los Angeles pro-Nazi groups, and they raided the leader of this group. They raided his stuff, and they found this there, and so he had been using it to propagandize against the Jews, and apparently it's still used today, like in the Middle East and stuff. Apparently it's still floating around.
Oh my God!
So that was a big, like, wow, what the hell did I miss moment.
That just shows you how pernicious this sort of shit is, because it's like, who are these elders of Zion I keep hearing about? Where are they from? It's like, oh wait, okay, I'm okay. I mean, I looked at something today, and it was like a picture of the British Houses of Parliament, and in one photograph, the Houses of Parliament are completely empty. There's just one person debating on the floor, and then in the other one, it's absolutely jam-packed, and it says, debating vaccine safety on the left, on the right, debating pay rise for the MPs. And you sort of go, you see? And of course, it's just faked. I mean, those are two photographs. And if you sort of do a Google image search, you'll find those photographs with totally different random sort of subtitles all the way through, some of which I would agree with, debating the state of the NHS on the left, debating pay rise on the right, or, and some of which I won't. But it's just that absolute, it's got worse with the internet, but it's always been there. And I mean, one of the things that I thought as well, to just go to stop myself from digressing too much, because I can feel it coming on.
There's a lot to digress through in this book, for sure.
Absolutely, isn't it? It's a testament to how,
because you're right. This Franklin prophecy is 100% a 1930s version of some viral misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exactly what it is.
Exactly. It's Obama's birth certificate, or it's the, you know, the some doctor somewhere did a study about something during COVID, which, you know, you could weirdly find it difficult to actually source who this doctor was.
Right.
One of the things that comes up again and again and again is how these films that they're making, Confessions of a Nazi Spy and are ripped from the headlines. You used the phrase earlier, and they're based on articles or books or true accounts. And one of the defenses of Hollywood is, okay, well, if this is so pernicious, if this is so terrible and so propagandistic, why didn't you go back after the publishers? Why do you only go after the film version? And so in that sense, it also seems to be a foreshadowing of the fact that it's always Hollywood which is going to get hammered here. You know, you can write, Chomsky can write books and have books published all you know, as long as the day is long, you know, and nobody will say anything, but you put it on screen and you're talking to everybody. It's more democratic, it's more dangerous in that sense. I mean, it's perceived as more dangerous. I don't want to say it's more dangerous, but it's perceived as more dangerous.
For sure. And you know, it's interesting because they bring up, it is brought up that, you know, why didn't you go after the journalists? And, you know, that's kind of an easy defense because why they didn't, just because, and this comes out of, you know, all of the controversy of Birth of a Nation in 1915 is that, you know, it was found that you know, Hollywood does not have free speech protections like journalists do. So the journalists just get a pass on this. The big one was the publishers, right? So it's like, if you're going after the Mortal Storm, why don't you go after the woman who wrote the book? And, you know, because, and the simple answer is probably because you're not going to get the headlines, right? Like the influence isn't there. And they probably should have questioned that a little bit more, but it is very clear why they go after Hollywood. It's a very similar reason why HUAC went after Hollywood, is because you're going to get the attention. You're going to get your arguments and your headlines on the national stage, national press, all that kind of stuff. And you know, of course, in this case, it did not help them at all. But the PR machine worked as it was supposed to, right? They did get the headlines. It was covered in the national press. It was covered in the trades, but it was also covered, you know, on the East Coast. I mean, it was covered in the Washington Post, New York Times. It was covered, you know, Chicago papers carried it, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was everywhere.
Absolutely. And the final sort of point of relevance that I want to bring up, and I totally understand your sort of reluctance to date the book too much by tying it too closely to contemporary resonance, but the story about the element that is very strong of anti-Semitism, which you've also said in terms of the fan letters to the senators, that has come back in a way which has been sort of both shocking and surprising. I mean, I'm frankly baffled by it. It's just one of those. You know, I would hope I am free of prejudice in a lot of different ways. I would very much hope, but anti-Semitism is just one of those ones which seem to be so. Maybe I was being way too complacent. It's just like, well, surely, you know, after the Holocaust, surely,
right,
that we're cured, aren't we? Can't we? And it's just like, oh no, we're not. And we've got Kanye West, and we've got and we've got way too much.
For sure. And that's something, while reading this or while writing this as well, I went through a similar kind of series of self-reflection where I was like, yeah, this is way worse. You know, it's two frustrations. One, I was, you know, embarrassed that I didn't realize it was as bad as it was. So it's like, that was another motivation to write the book, because it's like these stories need to be told. They need to be out there for people to understand that this can get this bad. But then also that, the parallels to, you know, while I was writing this, it was like every few months, the Anti-Defamation League would, you know, there'd be something come up. We're like, yeah, it's starting to look like the 1930s again. And I while going through what I did for this book, it's like, well, we cannot get back to the 1930s again. Wow. But right, in this country, we got the shootings at synagogues and all this stuff that's going on, and it's absolutely ridiculous, and it's so deep seated, and it seems very. It's like, how do you fight something that is just this pervasive and this widespread, and this just it's seemingly either widely accepted or too many people being complacent about it. And I think that's why I want to keep writing about it, because this story, but that's also why I was still motivated to do the Warner Brothers, because so much of their personal story is battling this kind of stuff, and so much of the stuff that they had to battle, people are still battling today. And it's not talked about as much. I mean, here we have, on college campuses in this country, there's so much talk about diversity and prejudice and anti-racism and all this kind of stuff, but the Jews are often left out of these conversations. And while anti-Semitism is running rampant, that's never really a key question of this. And at our university, I'm friends with some people in the Jewish studies program, and I remember, we had to do a self-paced module on racism. All faculty did, and I emailed them. I'm like, did I do 2 hours of that? And was there not one mention of anti-Semitism? And they're like, yeah, I think so. And it's just like, this is where you start in this. Now it's systemic, right? Like it's that same kind of complacency. I don't necessarily think my superiors down at the main campus are necessarily anti-Semitic, but I think there is this kind of acceptance that maybe, right after the Holocaust, right? Like this is not, maybe it's not a thing anymore, but right, you start asking our friends in Jewish communities, and they'll tell you very quickly that it's not only is it bad, but it never really got better either.
Right. Again, it's like that thing of it sort of, people become a little bit more polite, but they're not necessarily, those attitudes are still sort of simmering away in
right. And this is where a movie like Gentleman's Agreement is still so powerful, right? With Gregory Peck, where it's like, we haven't really moved on from that. Like, so you watch that movie, it's like that stuff is still happening today. And we have, there's been a lot of stuff with the Motion Picture Academy Museum, right? They open up, and now, a lot of the biggest donors go to the opening gala, and they're like, where are the Jews? And they're excluded again, just like when they came to town and they had to create their own club to hang out at because all the rest of them were restricted. So a lot of this stuff, on just a wider scope was just eye-opening to me, that, the more I looked at what was going on with this investigation, the same things were popping up seemingly everywhere around me.
Absolutely. And but don't worry, Dave Chappelle's on the case. We'll be fine if his searing edgelord commentary can save the day. It's just so depressing, because it's such it feels like intersectionality should be a way forward with all of this. It's not a competition of different grievances. It's something that we can chew and walk and at the same time, but it does seem to be, I don't know, the internet, or I haven't got a clue, to tell you the truth. So I should stop pontificating. But what is important is that we have these books and we have this history. Although I'm going to nitpick you a little bit here. So get ready.
Fine.
Get ready to defend.
Fine.
Get ready to defend yourself. In your afterward, or your final chapter anyway, you mention you're talking about exactly what we're talking about now, actually, the importance of history, the importance of an understanding of history. And you refer to a study which says something about 2/3 of college students think that socialism is a viable sort of political option. And then you add sort of like without any knowledge of the murderous history of socialism. Okay. I'm paraphrasing you, but I think that's roughly it. But my nitpicky point is the word socialism there. If you say communism, then there's a very good argument for that. There's gulags, there's Khmer Rouge, there's a lot. But socialism is I mean, that's George Orwell. That's the British Labour Party. That's the Scandinavian democracies. That's President Mitterrand. I mean, they have probably got blood on their hands in a sort of colonial fashion, just the same as like liberalism or any European power for that matter. But I just think that's that's just the socialism rather than communism there.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. No, I agree with that. And my guess is that study was one of the things that happens here a lot is that communism and socialism get conflated. That those words get used interchangeably. And what I'm guessing, my intention here is just more. And when this is talked about here, and this is something that I'll probably do a second edition of this before too long, and I'll probably expand the conclusions. I'll expand on some of this stuff as well as probably do a preface about all the Anti-Defamation League numbers. But the way these conversations, the way I have seen them usually come up, the reason socialism is used is because it's seen as, you're right, like the murderous history is communism, right? But the talk of socialism is seen as like the conduit to communism and the murderous history. So that's kind of where it is, or at least what I meant with what those studies are trying to say. Even though you're right, there's a difference here. It's just, it's a kind of leftward thinking that when goes too far, it gets to that ugly history. But that probably should be elaborated and explained more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't want to. It literally is like one word that I'm in the whole book that I've. So I don't want to. But I'm just thinking, like, the Mensheviks were murdered by the Bolsheviks. It wasn't like the Mensheviks necessarily opened. I mean, you could argue they opened the door for the Bolsheviks, but they were kind of murdered by them. So it's. I don't think it's the Mensheviks' fault that happened.
No, I completely agree. There should be an additional sentence clarifying that trajectory, but that's usually that's where my mind was anyway. Right. That's where these conversations happen here, and that's kind of the trajectory. So I was just kind of assuming that everybody knows that, which I probably shouldn't assume. So
no, but this is the thing. I think that's what the reason I reacted to that was just simply because I really like this book. I found it such a fascinating read. It was really new to me, this whole story. And as I said right at the top, it just reads like a thriller. It has, and it's got so many great moments, so many great beats. So we've got Bryan Cranston is going to play the lawyer who goes outside and does the. Have you sort of written a treatment and sent this off?
I haven't, and I probably should, because multiple people have mentioned this. Well, and it's actually the book was used. Anthony Marra just wrote a book called Mercury Pictures Presents, and which is kind of a fictional history. And he had read my book, and I since got to know him through this. But he wrote a book about a studio head at a difficult part of his life and in history. And the background of this book is the Senate investigation. So he used and actually cited his sources, which is why I found out. So it's a fantastic book that kind of plays with this. It shows how this could work in a kind of a fun narrative sense.
Yeah, I think you should definitely get your agent onto that and or Patrick. Patrick will know someone.
I'm sure he does.
Oh, George, get George to do it. George,
there you go.
I'm sure he could pull some strings.
Oh yeah, he knows that. He clearly knows and has known everybody.
Absolutely. I've absolutely adored speaking with him. Listen, there's one last thing, Chris, that we have to do, which is, and this is going to be the last episode before Christmas. So never has the recommended book had such weight. So I want you to recommend a book for our readers, for our listeners, sorry, and readers, obviously, because if you're listening to a podcast called Writers on Film, you must be readers. So what book would you recommend to our listeners, a book on film?
Oh, book on film. Well, I was going to say I've already kind of sung the praises of that J. Edgar Hoover book, which has a lot of parallels to this kind of history. So,
But just tell us the name of the author again of that book as well. So if anybody's interested,
Beverly Gage.
Beverly Gage
is her name, and it's called. Oh man, no, I'm just blanking. But it's Hoover. But yeah, it basically tracks him throughout the entire century, which is fantastic.
Wow.
As far as one book that I will recommend that was really, really cool and really kind of subverted my expectations in a lot of ways. It's called Inventing the It Girl by Hilary Hallett. I believe that's how to pronounce her last name. If I got it wrong, I'm terribly sorry. But the subtitle is, I'm just looking it up here so I get it right. How Eleanor Glynn created the modern romance and conquered early Hollywood. It's a fascinating book about how much of the 1800s and a lot of European culture was brought to Hollywood and infused in ways you might not have known. These families, I mean, it's an incredible history that tracks this woman's life. And towards the end of her life, she was kind of a really big influence in Hollywood and teaching female stars how to be the it girl, how to bring this kind of reserved yet at the same time overt sexiness to the screen. So it kind of recontextualized a lot of silent cinema in ways that I did not expect, and I found it really, really, really cool.
Excellent. That's brilliant. So Inventing the It Girl by Harriet
Hillary.
Hilary Hallett. Hallett. Okay, brilliant. And Beverly Gage's book was called G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, G-Man, that's right.
And the Making of the American Century. God damn it. I'm going to have to buy both of those books, aren't I now?
And I'm just actually looking at my Twitter feed here. I had put up a couple pictures of books that I had read this year that I thought were really cool. So I was going through there to pick one. But if anybody wants to look, handle at Chris Yogerst, there's stacks of books there that were all really good that I read this year.
Yeah, a lot of them have featured on the podcast as well. I was very pleased to see Sam was on with Hollywood.
Had him on there. That was a fun one.
Dana Stevens with the Buster Keaton, I think, cameraman.
The book was fantastic.
This has been a bumper year of great film books, actually. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just noticing them more because we're doing the podcast, and so it's more, I'm reading much more of these film books than I used to, but there's been not some just really good ones.
I felt the same way. I feel like I've watched less movies this year just because there's so much I want to read. There's just so much good stuff coming out, and maybe it's just because we had the pandemic and everybody was just writing.
Definitely, that could be the reason. But it gives me. I mean, that's the perfect combination for me is books and movies, because every time I read a book I want to watch more movies, and every time I watch movies I want to go to the book and find out what happened, so like for instance, on my watch list from your book is The Mortal Storm, which I've never seen, and I've never seen Confessions of a Nazi Spy. So those are two films I'm going to hunt out and watch.
Mortal Storm, like I said, is gonna hit like a ton of bricks. Confessions of a Nazi Spy is very much it plays like a newsreel almost. There's a lot of narration. There's some really good punchy narration in it. But I actually used it. I just started teaching a class on the history of popular culture and censorship in popular culture. And because I had written this book and done all this research, I used Confessions of a Nazi Spy, and I had the students watch it, and I was expecting them to not really like it, but just to understand why it was historically relevant. But they actually found it, these 19, 20, 21-year-olds today found it really fascinating. Really? So I was pleasantly surprised. I thought I just liked it because I'm neck deep in the research, but they read, one chapter from my book and, watched the movie and found it really compelling.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, never underestimate students. That's my mantra, because they're always smart. They're smarter than you think.
Definitely.
There are a few idiots, but that's just life. Try not to say it in class to their face. That's
No, never.
That would be inappropriate. Brilliant, Chris. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I loved the book, as I've already said several times, and I think this is I think this isn't the last version we're going to see, and I don't think this is the last. We're going to see this in something else, a documentary or a drama or something.
I hope so.
So all that remains for me to do is to thank for the music Elliot Atkins, for the artwork Ali Howard, and I will see you all after Christmas. Take care of yourselves.